Welcome to the DianFossey exhibit at Brunel University. My name is Melissa Hosey, and I was the curator of the exhibit, and I have with me Dr. Tara Stawinski from the DianFossey Fund International, and she's here to answer a few questions and talk about the exhibit a little bit and about DianFossey's life and work.
Thank you for having me, and thanks so much for having this exhibit. It really looks incredible.
Thank you. As you can see, the exhibit kind of starts here at DianFossey's chair and her table. She did everything here from study to eat and record her gorilla observations. While we're here, can you tell us a little bit about DianFossey's life and work and just an overview of how she began and how it got started?
It's really great to see her desk set up. I've seen it in so many pictures, but to see it set up like this is obviously somewhere that DianFossey spent an incredible amount of time. And it looks a little archaic to us, but things actually haven't changed all that much. When Diane went up into the forest to study the gorillas, she would spend all day out with them writing notes on what they did, very detailed handwritten notes, and then at night would come back and sit at this desk and type them up on this computer typewriter like you see here. And we do the same thing now. We continue to monitor the animals that Diane originally studied, and we do the same detailed note-taking, except now we transfer it to a computer.
We have in this case the uncorrected proof copies of DianFossey's famous book, Gorillas in the Mist. It's really interesting to see how she made her own observations and her own corrections on her work with pencil afterwards. You can see where she did that on these pages. Kind of wondering what caused her to want to write Gorillas in the Mist, or what was her reasoning behind writing this book?
So when Diane went to Karasaki, it was 1967, so 43 years ago, and at that time we really knew nothing about gorilla behavior. There really had been one study of gorillas, and the individual had not been able to spend a lot of time getting to know the specifics of gorilla social life. So when Diane went there was this perception that gorillas were very aggressive. They're these large animals. Male gorillas are the largest primate on the planet. They weigh about 450 pounds. So she went in there and started studying them and found that they were nothing like the stereotypes that were out there, that they were actually very gentle animals. Their nickname is Gentle Giant. They obviously can be aggressive when they're defending their families, but otherwise gorilla social life is actually quite calm and very, it's a very, very close-knit family. So she conveyed a lot of these details in her scientific writings, but that's for a very specific audience. And I think what Gorillas in the Mist provided her was the opportunity to really delve into a lot of details and tell a lot more about these families, about the very intimate interactions between these families that she couldn't do through some of her other writing venues.
So she was trying to reach a broader audience than just the scientific publication, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And that happened a little bit through the National Geographic articles that came out, but those were short pieces, and so this really enabled her to expand upon what she had already told the public about through National Geographic. So just a way to really tell about the gorillas in her words.
This is a very interesting display case that we have in the corner here. It's filled with beautiful Rwandan artwork and wood carvings, as well as some handcrafted Rwandan musical instruments. And especially I'm interested in this large drum that we put in the case, because when I was reading Gorillas in the Mist, I read about a Christmas celebration that Diane had with some of the local population that had come into her cabin, and they talked about how they were having just some festivities and banging on the drum. And it led me to ask the question to myself, what kind of a relationship did Fossey have with the local population, the people who were already living in that area when she came in?
Well, Diane was very much in touch with the local population, and part of the reason for that is that this area where the gorillas live is one of the most densely populated places in Africa. So there are humans all around the forest. So it's not a very remote location. There's people everywhere. And certainly the local population worked with Diane. They worked in her camp. They helped care for her. They worked with her when she was studying the gorillas. And she had a lot of positive interactions. And celebrating is part of Rwandan culture and music and dancing, and so I think seeing these instruments here and the drum in particular is very much a part of what Rwandans do when they want to celebrate.
Speaking of the local population, I have over here in this corner some poacher snares that we took and put up, as we have some dog bells, I think the poachers would put around the necks of their dogs, and we have also, in this case over here, we have a spear, it looks like, and a bow and an arrow, and these were weapons that apparently Fossey had confiscated from poachers in the area. Can you speak to us a little bit about the poaching that went on in that area, and if it still goes on today?
When Diane went, I think she originally went to study the gorillas and learn about them, but what became very readily apparent to her were the challenges facing the population. Poaching was a significant one. So people in the area didn't generally poach gorillas, but they would put snares down that were meant to catch small antelope or other animals, and unfortunately the gorillas would get caught in them. And so it would often be very difficult for them to get out, particularly if it was a wire snare. And it could actually result in the gorilla losing a limb or even losing their life if they were to get a bad infection. So Digit was one of Diane's favorite animals. I think he was one of the first gorillas to really connect with her. And he was a young male living in his group, and he was a little bit on the periphery. That's what happens to gorilla males as they mature. They kind of have to stay on the periphery of the group. And I think Diane really identified with him because in some ways she was a little bit on the periphery of her society as well, you know, living in a forest in Africa. So they had a very strong connection, and unfortunately he was killed by poachers that had come in, and he was defending his family and was killed. And I think this was devastating for Diane, and it really started her on this crusade to switch from not just doing research but also protecting the gorillas. And she started the Digit Fund in order to raise money to put these anti-poaching patrols out there that would go through and remove snares and look for evidence of people coming into the forest. And after she died, that organization was changed to, the name of the organization was changed to the DianFossey Gorilla Fund. So this organization is actually the same organization that Diane started after the death of Digit in the 1970s. What Diane would do is she would use their noses. So each gorilla has its own nose print the same way we have individual fingerprints. And so she would take these pictures of them, and based on that she would actually had a book where she would draw these nose prints out so that when she was in the field she could identify individuals. And you can see in these pictures that there is a lot of variation in their nose print. So you've got this one here with a really nice little triangle spot that makes that nose very distinguishable. And so these are, I think Diane enjoyed looking at the gorillas, but they also served a very important scientific purpose in terms of helping her identify.
Looking at this hand-drawn map, I was wondering if anyone had ever made any maps of the area or explored in detail this area before DianFossey came along.
I don't think there were a lot of maps available in that area, and certainly one of the important things that Diane was interested in looking at was where in the habitat the gorillas went and how this would relate to what kind of foods that were there and where the other groups were located. So she took a lot of time and effort to draw these very painstaking maps. We are so lucky now that we have GPS technology, and we still record the same information. So every day we record where the gorillas are located, where they sleep at night, so that we can look at how these animals interact with their physical environment as well as their social environment, the other groups that are living in the area. But we can generate much prettier maps. These are beautiful to see, but they certainly are a reflection of the times in which Diane worked.
When I was at the storage facility, I also saw high heels and shoes and clothes of well-known name brands, and it was just interesting to see that. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about this other aspect or this other side to DianFossey besides the scientist.
Well, I think it's important to remember that DianFossey actually didn't start her adult life wanting to study gorillas. So she actually had a job as an occupational therapist. She had worked for a long time before she went to Africa, which is kind of a different trajectory for scientists, and I think it's one of the things that makes her really intriguing. So I hope that people will come and see this exhibit, get excited about gorillas, and encourage other people and teach other people what they've learned here, and continue their education about gorillas and about the habitat in which they live.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming and sharing with us, and making this all so interesting.
Yeah, well, thank you again, and it's wonderful for me to see, not being someone that had met DianFossey, by the time I got involved in this profession, Diane had actually already died. So I feel like I've stepped back in time, and it's really, you've done a wonderful job. So thank you very much to Brunel University for putting this together.
Yeah.